Hello again, everyone. So far, we've discussed how non-traditional work structures and putting employees first are primary factors of the ongoing work shift. But what if you followed all of these steps and things still aren't going well? Many employees are still prone to burnout, which has long-term negative effects for both individuals and their companies. Our next speaker is here to share the benefits of self-care and a thoughtful work-life balance, and will be signing copies of her book, Career Self-Care, in the lobby after her talk. Please welcome author and columnist Minda Zetlin.
Hello. So, show of hands, how many of you worked one day this past weekend? 2 days this past weekend. How many regularly find yourselves still at your desks into the evening, 7 p.m., 9 p.m., even later? How many of you are still at your desks at 5 or 6 p.m., even though you started your day at 5 or 6 a.m.? And how many of you would believe me if I told you that after listening to this talk, you would never, ever do that again? Yeah, right, ridiculous. We all do it. I do it too. And there's good reasons. There's a big project, a crunch time. If you're starting a business, there's often a lot to do, a big deadline. But for too many of us, this has turned into normal working pattern. And that's not good. I think we do this for two reasons. One is, and both these reasons are good. One is, we love our jobs, right? I love my job. I hope you do too. Loving what you do for work is one of the great blessings in this life, I think. But just because you love something doesn't mean you always have to be doing it, right? I love my sister, but it would not be good for me to spend 12 hours a day with her. And the other reason we do this, another good reason, is we're ambitious. We have big dreams. We want success. We want to do big things. And what I'm hoping to convince you of is that the way to achieve that is not necessarily to add more hours to our work days. It's something else. And this is the first big reason why it's important for all of us to stop working so hard, because it won't get us where we want to go. About 9 years ago, a copywriter in Indonesia named Mita Diran literally worked herself to death. And I was so naive that when I heard about this, I didn't think that it was physically possible to work yourself to death, at least not if you had the kind of job like most of us do, I think, where you sit at a desk. And Mita wasn't the first person to do it, but she's definitely the most famous person to have done it, because as she was working herself to death, she tweeted about it. She tweeted how wonderful it was to get home from work before midnight instead of after, as usual. She tweeted that it was 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night, and she was sitting at her office with 9 other people, and that was okay. They were all working. That was fine. She tweeted that she dreamed of moving her bed to her office so she could go straight from her desk to sleep. And finally, she tweeted, 30 hours of work and still going strong. Actually, strong. That strong had 3 O's in it. And those 3 O's somehow, they really get me, because that was the last word she ever would tweet. That day she fell into a coma and she died without ever waking up. And when I read this story, it kind of hit me like a slap in the face, because although I was not in any danger of working myself to death, I was in a really bad place. I was working weekends all the way through. I was working late hours. My husband complained that I was unavailable to talk to him, which is pretty bad when you consider that I worked at home and so did he. But at least I thought I was really doing my best at my job, right? But it turns out even that wasn't really true. Because doing our best at our job is less about working longer hours and more about the state that we're in when we're working. A few years ago, a brain expert named Josh Davis was scheduled to give a talk in a beautiful destination city. And he and his wife went there a couple of days early so that they could visit the city and be tourists before his talk. The talk was on a Monday, and on Saturday, he found out that a more senior colleague from his same university was planning to give the exact same presentation he had planned. So because this other person was more senior, he had to change his. So just think about that for a moment. Just imagine it. You're about to give a talk to 500 people. It's in less than 2 days. It's important for your career. And you've just found out that you have to tear it up, throw it out the window, and start over from scratch. What would you do? I know what I would do. First, I would say a bunch of words that I really can't say on stage. Then I would tell my husband, go get out of here, go have fun without me. I hate you. Then I would call room service and order a gallon of coffee and a stack of pastries. And then I would pop open my laptop and try to do some useful work. And probably not succeed for the first hour or so because I was too crazed. Fortunately, Josh Davis is a brain expert, and he didn't do any of that. I would ask you to guess what he did, but I don't think any of you would guess, so I'll just tell you. He took his wife, and they went to lunch. A long, leisurely lunch. And then they took a stroll around the beautiful city for a couple of hours. And while he was doing that, he said the anxiety around having to change his presentation started to lessen. Yeah, he said, I'm still worried. I knew I had to do it. But the whole feeling of, that slowly went away. And so over the next day and a half, in 1 and 2 hour snatches, he rewrote his presentation. And guess what? It was a huge hit. He has used it over and over again because the work he did in those 2 hour snatches was really on point, was really there. He was what some of us call in the zone, in flow, and what Josh Davis calls awesome. He was in awesome time. And he says we can all have about 2 hours of awesome time if we do it right. And it's not about working those extra hours. It is about, when we sit down to work, as much as possible, being happy, healthy, and at ease. So when we're happy and healthy and at ease is when we do our most effective work. Another important thing that can make us happy, healthy, and at ease is to take frequent breaks, which it turns out is very important for brain function too. So raise your hand if your job has no creativity and no learning, no imagination whatsoever. Good, I'm not seeing any hands, yay, because that would be sad. Well, it turns out taking breaks is when your brain can do all that stuff. Now, I learned this in a very silly way when I tried to ride a Segway for the first and only time. My husband and I took a Segway tour. The tour guide zoomed off on his Segway. My husband zoomed off on his Segway. And I struggled to keep up. It's not that I couldn't do it, but I certainly couldn't do it well. About halfway through, we stopped at a pretty park and took a rest for 15 minutes, chatted about stuff that had nothing to do with Segways. I get back on, I can ride the Segway. What happened? I didn't understand then, but I do now. When you fix your attention on something, your prefrontal cortex goes into actions, the part of your mind that analyzes, decides, what we think of as thinking. When you take your attention off, other parts of your brain come into play. New neural pathways form. Good stuff happens. Learning happens. Creativity happens. So take frequent breaks, at least 1 day a week, really, unless it's a super crunch time. And ideally, 10 to 15 minutes every hour to give your brain that creative processing time. Another important reason to take breaks is that a tired brain doesn't make good decisions. So raise your hand if your job involves no decisions whatsoever. Good, no hands, because if you raised your hand, I wouldn't believe you. Even sending an email involves making decisions. Tired brain, especially a sleep-deprived brain, cannot make good decisions. I learned this the hard way myself, because it turns out a brain cannot make good decisions about whether or not it needs a rest. So people at Harvard discovered that if you were to stay awake for 24 hours straight and not sleep, that would be the equivalent in your brain of a blood alcohol level of 0.10%, which means probably slurred speech, definitely visibly drunk, and illegal to drive just about everywhere. Okay, so I think we all know if we stay up 24 hours, our brains aren't great. What if you got 6 hours of sleep every night? Now, some people think that's enough. Science tells us it's not. Science tells us we need 7 to 8 hours, almost all of us. And it turns out if you get 6 hours of sleep for 9 nights in a row, the same Harvard study found, you are as impaired as if you stayed up for 24 hours or had a blood alcohol level of 0.10, but we don't know it because our brains are too tired to know it. I discovered this myself when I tried driving home in the middle of getting a divorce 100 miles on the New York State Thruway, and about halfway through, I started to drift off, rolled over and destroyed my car. Fortunately, only broke a finger. Always wear your seatbelt. But the responders who came to rescue me said, you know, for next time, consider pulling over and taking a 15-minute nap. Well, duh. That would have been a good idea. I probably passed half a dozen motels. I could have stopped for the night. My brain was too tired to make a good decision. And one more thing. I don't know if any of you have been through Alzheimer's with anyone you care about. I have. My mother had it for 20 years. It was dreadful. It turns out when we sleep, this is a recent discovery, our brains pulse. Fluid flows in, flows out, and takes the beta amyloids that cause Alzheimer's with it. But this can only happen after several hours of sleep. So, if nothing else from this talk, please prioritize sleep. So it probably sounds to you like I'm asking you to do less stuff. And guess what? I am asking you to do less stuff. Which brings me to the fourth reason why it's really important for all of us to stop working so hard. Because it will force us to learn to do something that is very difficult for many of us. So, how many people here have a hard time saying no? That my hand is up. I definitely have a hard time saying no. You know, somebody offers us a job, a project, a meeting, a conversation, and we think, well, you know, this could possibly lead to an opportunity. Maybe if I say no, I'll miss out. Maybe if I say no, they won't like me. I'll cause offense. Maybe it'll be bad for our relationship. So we say yes. And we keep saying yes until our schedules are completely full. And then we say no because we're at capacity. But what if we didn't wait till that point? What if, when somebody offers us an opportunity, a conversation, a meeting, or whatever, instead of saying yes if we have the time, we also stop to ask, how sure am I that this opportunity will meaningfully move me towards my definition of success? And if the answer to that isn't yes, we should consider saying no. I recently interviewed a guy named Richard Schuster who used to work 80 hours a week, right? When his doctor first asked him about it, he said, oh no, I don't work at all, because he believed that thing where if you love what you do, then you're not really working, right? Yeah, no. So he worked 80 hours a week right up until the day he had a stroke at the age of 46. And he was told, if you keep going the way you're going, you're going to die. It's that simple. So he stopped working 80 hours a week. He cut it back to 25. Like everyone I've spoken to who made a change like that, he says he has been more successful, not less, since he made that change. So think about that. Think about the most successful people you know. Do they work really late, or do they set proper limits on their time? Just think about it. So he gave me a test that he uses every time somebody asks him to do something that I think is brilliant and I think we should all be using. If somebody offers you an opportunity, a conversation, etc., and your immediate first reaction isn't, hell yes, then it should be no. Which brings me to the fifth and biggest reason why we all have to stop working ridiculous hours. Because when we say yes to too many things, when we fill our schedules to capacity, when we keep adding hours to the beginning and the ends of our day, sometimes we will not be able to be there for the things that are really important. We will not be able to be there for the things that we really love. So around the time I first heard about Mita-Duran, I got pneumonia. My husband and I were both exposed to the same germs. On him it was bronchitis, but I was run down, and so I got pneumonia. So the day I got pneumonia, I started my day by crawling to my computer and sending out a bunch of emails because I had interviews scheduled that day with important people that I'd spent a long time setting up, and now I had to say, sorry, I can't do it. Then, after I'd done that, I took my temperature, which was 102, so I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you have pneumonia. And my heart sank for reasons that had nothing to do with work. I've mentioned that my mother had Alzheimer's. At that time, she was 90 years old. Her husband was 101 years old. And they were living at home, but with a lot of support from family members. And that weekend, I had committed to go and be with them and take care of them so that other members of the family could do other things. And now, I had to make one of the most miserable phone calls of my life to say that I was bailing. I wasn't going to be there. Because not only was I in no way up to driving 4 hours to where they lived and taking care of anyone, it was also out of the question to go near these frail elderly people while I was carrying pneumonia. I was not able to be there for the people that I loved, for the thing that was most important, and I never, ever wanted to do that again. So I've thought a lot about Mita-Duran, and I've wondered, what if someone had warned her? What if someone from the future had gone back and said, you know, I know you think you're killing it at your work, but if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to die right here in your 20s. You're never going to get married. You're never going to have children. You won't have that big career you're dreaming of either. It's all going to end right here. What do you think she would have done? What do you think she would choose? Because after all, it is a choice. We don't often talk about this, but our careers are finite. They will end someday. And although our lives will hopefully go on longer than our careers, our lives also are finite. And that means that every moment that we spend doing anything, working because we love our work, and we should, playing, being with our friends, being with our family, spending time alone, spending time in nature, scrolling social media, all the stuff that makes up life. Every moment, we are making a choice about what we think is most important, whether we think about it or not. And so, I think we need to think about it. We need to make these choices with our eyes wide open. We need to choose the things that matter most. We need to choose the things that we really love. So thank you. Please scan the QR code. There's a lot more information there, including how to get in touch with me. And I will, as Jared said, be signing my book out in the lobby right after this talk. Come talk to me, even if you don't want a book. I love talking about this stuff. And thank you so much for listening to me today.